Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the second episode of this podcast, which is the Playbook. Today, with me is Aditi Sinha. I have known her for quite a while now. She is ex-CEO of Locale.ai and Forbes 30 under 30. And apart from that, she has built Local.ai as a global platform for almost 5 to 6 and apart from that, she has also right now have become an author and written a book which talks more about ambition, entrepreneur, and journey with respect to that. And before we proceed further, like welcome Aditi to this podcast. Thanks for joining us and coming over here.
Thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure to be here.
Thanks. So Aditi, before taking things further, I wanted to help you understand what this podcast is all about. So it's something we are helping early stage founders who are in their building stage. They tend to struggle with respect to how to strategize the GTM, how to work on the sales process, how to set up the early stages. So all in all, that's the basic idea of building this podcast. So you come with all sort years of experience in this domain. So it will be like if you can share all your insights and it would be helpful for all our users to just get a better understanding how to take things ahead in terms of how in 2026 26 how things are currently, right? Yeah. So before we start, I want to start with a basic question. So, how you started working on this Local.ai? Okay, what was your idea and what made you even start this project over here?
Yeah, sure. Seems like such a long time back now. Actually, I was in my final year of college and interning in a startup, and that's where I met my co-founder. And we were working on a lot of projects together, and that's when we realized that while different teams inside every company have a very specialized SaaS product that is built for them. When you take any team, right from data to design to engineering to HR to admin and compliance and all of that. And, operations teams inside companies were still using a mix of Excel sheets and some internally built products. Right. And, we started by focusing on companies that have ground operations. So, your delivery companies, mobility companies, logistics companies. And the idea behind Locale was, can we build a specialized SaaS product for operations people in these companies to help them understand, how their ground business is performing. So it was basically a map based analytics and visualization product. And we used to help people understand, what is their demand and supply in different areas and different times and all of that. So yeah, that's how we started.
Got it. Got it. That's great to hear. So, may I understand, when did you started on this? Okay, what was your like how was your early stage of business? Like, how did you decided what was your priority in terms of building the product or setting up the process in terms of reaching out to customers in that way? How was that?
Yeah, I think early on, there is so much to do when you're running a business. As far as my memory can sort of, tell, I think the way we basically used to go about doing business is just ask ourselves, how do we sort of grow as a business, right? And grow is also a very vague term. Basically, we decided on a metric that we would measure week on week, right? So
Okay.
earlier, let's say it could be your number of conversations that you're having with people to validate your idea. Second can be, your number of pilots that you're getting from these conversations. Third could be, your number of paying customers and revenue. So depending on the stage of the business, you need to have a North Star metric, and whatever you need to do in order to sort of hit that metric or that goal is what you need to focus on. So early on, it could also be sort of making sure that, all your legal and your compliance is sorted in terms of setting your incorporation up. Maybe, if it's just you and your co-founder and, at that moment there was no AI. So we needed to hire people. And early on, we sort of hired some interns who could help my co-founder sort of build the product. Right.
Mhm.
So you need to figure out, to achieve that goal, what are the exact things that you need to do. Sometimes it could also be, hey, we also need to fundraise parallelly. So I think that as a framework could be helpful.
Got it. And do you think like having a right co-founder, it's like a beneficial when you're starting up in this journey?
Yeah, I mean, it's like how people, I would say, look at marriage. It's like having the right partner by your side, and that is what makes all the difference. It can make or break your life, but if you don't have the right person next to you, it's better to be, single, and it's better to be, just it's better to just continue your life on your own. Right? So I would say the same logic and framework also applies in the business world. If you have someone who really can be a good team player, can be a good partner while you're on that journey, it's obviously much, much easier and better to have a co founder. But if you don't have someone like that, and like a bad co founder is always, always worse than doing a company solo. So, between the two of them, I would say having a good co founder is the best outcome. Then the second best is, doing it solo. And third is something you should never ever go for, which is having someone that you're not compatible with.
Yeah, yeah, makes sense. Completely makes sense. And to be honest, like if you see in today's market, everyone is like have like a team in which one acts in terms of this GTM sales marketing aspect and other takes care of this technical aspect product work. So like that's how currently people are working together. Like do you believe that having this like strengths one with respect to sales and marketing, one respect to the product and tech, it's a good team to go into the market in the current system. What's your take on that?
It's obviously better, but I won't say that's the non-negotiable or the make or break, right? It's always better, when you have someone who is good at something or is passionate about something or their interest lies in one thing, and then you can sort of divide your roles accordingly. Having said that, we have seen a lot of examples of very successful companies where, both the founders were actually technical, but one technical founder became the CEO and took care of all the business, and the other person became the CTO and took care of all the tech and the product. So more than having complementary skill sets, I think what is important is that there is a very clear division of roles and responsibilities, number one. And number two, whatever it is that you need to do, ultimately you need to enjoy doing that. It should give you energy on most days, and you should also be able to quickly pick that up. So
Absolutely.
as long as I think these factors are being accounted for, I think it's okay if two people are from the same, let's say, technical field, but they have also divided responsibilities accordingly. I think what's really, really important, to ensure in your co-founder is that you have the same values. Again, just like marriage, you value the same things, you value the same outcome for the company. The way you want to build the company should be very similar. The way you want to serve customers should be very similar. I think these are the areas where you need to align with, your co-founder on.
Got it, got it. Yeah, that's correct. To be honest, like me also, while building the Unix, I had like my friend Sham, who comes from this tech aspect. So together we aligned, and as you mentioned, marriage and everything. That is actually a very core factor when we're building the business. So coming to Locale, so when you started and build your first, when the product was ready, okay, how did you reach out to your first initial set of customers? What were your challenges, and how did you convince your customer to like try, give at least give it a try for Locale.ai?
Yeah, so one interesting thing we did during that time is actually we did not build the product. We sold the product first before building it in the first place. So, there's a very famous story about Locale where we used to pitch people and we used to email them and cold call them and just say that, hey, this is the product that we've built and would you like a demo? And we would test different variations and different hypotheses on those calls and those demos, right? And I still remember there's this really interesting person who was very enthu, and he was like, I would really like to loop in my manager, and if in order to do that, I would love to have a website of your company. And I really remember that weekend, we didn't really have a website as well. So I told him that, we'll send it to you on Monday. You should really take the weekend off. And we coded it out during the entire weekend. So, so the way we sort of approached this was just keep pitching before building and seeing what really interests the people, what really makes them excited and what makes them sort of become your champion, right? Because ultimately that's the important thing to account for when you're doing sales. But having said that, now with AI and product building becoming so commoditized, I would probably not do it that way. I would actually build sort of working demos and working prototypes, even if they are, let's say, much more simpler in nature. Because, only when people see it and if possible, they use it, the feedback that you get is extremely, extremely valuable. And that's the right kind of feedback that you want. Because sometimes what people say and how they behave are completely different things, right?
Makes
So
sense.
in today's world, if I were to start up again, that's how I would do it.
Right, right. Completely makes sense. But also, like, if since I guess Locale was targeting mid-market companies over here, right? So, as you mentioned, like, you have to like identify the champion, train them, and those. So, all in all, when there are so many stakeholders which are involved, okay, in terms of who is using a product, maybe a user, but there are certain decision makers who come into pictures, right? In order to even consider onboarding a product like say X product into their ecosystem, because like mid-market, these kind of enterprise companies, they have a lot of compliance which come into picture, right? So what do you think, like how do we, like a company or a guy who is starting up recently, how to bypass these kind of stuff?
Yeah, so it really depends on how you define your GTM motion. In our case, because we were doing, we were focusing on the mid market segment. We had a very defined GTM. We had essentially a marketing team, and we were focusing on a lot of sort of content creation that used to give us, very qualified inbound leads, and then we would sort of do inside sales on top of that. And in addition to that, we also had a sales outreach team, wherein we had a couple of SDRs, and they would sort of make cold calls. They would qualify the lead and then give it to the salesperson. So it was basically like an overlay with both the marketing and the sales working in tandem with each other. And of course, we actually came to this after a lot of iteration, trying out a bunch of things. So just like anything else in the startup journey, you need to iterate on your approach, try out a lot of experiments, and see what sticks.
Yeah, right.
And again, depends on, ultimately your GTM depends on what is the price point that people are willing to pay for. Because the unit economics has to work at the end of the day. Your motion has to be profitable. So that is the only constraint. Now within that constraint, you can try out a bunch of things and see what sticks.
Yeah, it completely makes sense. Pricing, that actually plays a very key role in terms of
Yes.
like when you are early. Right. And you mentioned, like, with respect to this sales, setting up the GTM process, you already had set up this. So, what were the challenges? What are the trial and error which you did, and how did you found that this is something which is working for us, and double down on it in terms of expanding to other market in that way? How did you identify, and what were the challenges over there in that case?
Yeah, I mean, there were so many challenges, right? Like essentially, early on, we started with sort of focusing on the Indian geography, and then from there on, we were figuring out how do we expand internationally and globally, and that's when content marketing really started working out for us, because we would create like a lot of content. We would write different blogs. White papers were very common back then. Like really like these thought leadership kind of pieces, which would go really in depth about uh, what should people do in this kind of company, or while running these kind of operations, what kind of tech they should be running. So we really try to position ourselves as the leader in this space. And from that perspective, we sort of did all our marketing, and that sort of really helped when we were sort of reaching out to you know all these enterprise customers internationally. Typically, again, and this is something all companies face, you hear rejections like, hey, but this is something we can build internally, right? Or you know and in that case, I remember we had prepared this really detailed, again, analysis on how much it would cost for you to build this internally versus buy a product. And when we sort of did that analysis and we used to share that with people, that's when they used to realize, okay, this is not as easy as simple as it seems. Of course, some people still decided to build, and that is completely their choice and their discretion. Yes, so essentially what I was saying was that a lot of people at the end of the day still decided to buy that sorry build that product internally, but that was their choice and their discretion, and of course it depended on what their priority was. Sometimes people said, this is not the topmost priority for us. Again, in that case, we essentially did another analysis where we showed them in terms of how much revenue they were losing, or how much cost they were incurring because they didn't have a product like this internally. So you can, with all your rejections that you're getting, right, you can build these cases for your argument to win through, right? And the more mathematical and logical that case is, the better your chance of winning the deal. So yeah, I really
Make me
hope
come.
that helps other founders, who are also
Yeah,
dealing
it
with those
completely
kind of
makes sense. And also there's this stuff build versus buy, right? It's very tough to convince any user with respect to what exactly they should do. Like there's always this debate, should I build it or like should I? It's easy to for me to buy from any uh, stuff in the market, right? So that's always there in the like for market in the market. So now coming to fundraising, okay, I guess you have raised like pre-seed, seed, as well as Series A. So what was your strategy, okay, when it came to fundraising? How did you reach out to the potential investors? How was the discussion? What was the initial level of conversations? And can you just help walk us through on that?
Yeah, sure. So when we started, we were actually very, very young. We were both 23, and yeah, we did not have any contacts in the industry. In fact, to start this company, we had moved from Delhi to Bangalore without knowing anyone actually in the city. So initially, it was just, I used to spend 95% of my days just cold calling and cold emailing, whether that was, let's say, to potential investors, to potential customers, to potential hires. So I remember the first round that we did, which was a pre-seed, which was led by Better Capital, that actually came via just cold DMing him. I think for the seed round, so what happens is, the more investors that you sort of get on in every round, they actually also then start helping you raise your next round. So once we got like a first set of investors on board, so they helped us raise our seed round, because they also have the right connections in the industry, and they also know who are the right investors for you. Of course, we also did not completely rely on them, but it was the same process in all the three rounds. Like cold emailed all the investors that we knew, or that our founder friends recommended to us. Some of them came from referrals from Webhub, from Better Capital. And again, in the third round, the seed investors helped us sort of get referrals to sort of the investors for the third round. So yeah, the process is the same. Ultimately, it's about sort of how do you make your pitch and your positioning very sharp, and sort of a story that makes sense, like a story that is so undeniable in terms of it becoming a $1 billion company, because that is a story that an investor wants to hear. So the
Right.
main work is actually sort of focusing on that.
Right, right, correct. So, Aditi, like if you see current in 2026, there are a lot of AI companies which have come into pictures. Okay. And there's a debate which is going on, which is some AI bubble, okay, which is about to bust. Although at the same time, people are investing heavily in some AI tech companies as well, right? So, what do you think, like, would be a key challenges which come into picture in the current era of fundraising or investing for an early stage company?
Challenging for founders to fundraise, is that
Yeah,
what you're asking?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
Because like so much competition and like there's also a debate like AI is going to bust, bubble is going to bust. So people are skeptical about and investors are particular about what sort of companies they want to invest in. Okay, how a founder can reach out to this people like this investor, convince them and to get fund to get funded in that way.
Yeah, actually, on the contrary, I feel that with the rise of AI, like all investors have been investing left, right, and center. right? Because no one wants to be left out and everyone feels that FOMO. I think the principles of raising money has actually not changed at all just because we have sort of entered this new era. Ultimately, it just boils down to the fundamental of your business, right? Which is that, are you building something that is a real problem? Are you building something that, there's a definite gap in the market for, right? And the way to sort of validate that is to see whether, you have customers who use your product every day, whether they pay for it, whether they have growing reviews for it. Again, and of course, at the end of the day, how big is the market and how fast is the market growing? So as long as I think, you sort of hit all of those criteria and those factors, I think you will be in a good stage to get funded. Of course, this is, I'm talking about early stage funding. As you go to, sort of move towards series A and beyond, it becomes a lot more mathematical, it becomes a lot more about numbers, unit economics, profitability, scaling. At that stage, investors look for very different things. But these things I'm talking about in the pre-seed and seed and maybe pre-series A stages as well.
You also brought this like managing the unit economics, costing, pricing that plays a very important role in terms of when you're early, right? So there's also a saying like when you're early, like people do consider like they do start with a loss, okay, then slowly they like go towards achieving that profitability and everything, right? So does it make sense to have a positive unit economics from day one, or that can be like neglected in the initial days? What do you think?
I think it's always better. Like, if you ask me, it's always, better to have positive unit economics from day one, because as a founder, that gives you a lot of leverage to build a profitable business from day one, right? And then, you're not desperate for external funding, and you can raise that funding on your terms and, when you want a good deal as well. So, but let's say, sometimes, like for example, in our case, we didn't even have our own personal runway, right? Because we just graduated from college and we needed that funding to keep ourselves going. Getting to that stage where, you are unit economics profitable takes a little bit of time and iteration, right? Iteration with your product, your pitch, your messaging, your positioning, your market, and all of that. So because that requires time, we didn't have the luxury of time because we didn't have the luxury of runway. So that's why, then in that case you go for a pre-seed round rather than a seed round, right? Because, when you reach at seed, it's expected of you to sort of, be at a certain revenue threshold, and of course validated all your assumptions and your hypothesis. So it really depends from case to face. There is no hard and fast rule of doing it. If you do it, it's better. If you don't, then also it's fine. Like, we did it without, uh, like our pre-seed, we actually raised just, just when we had a bunch of pilots, and I think one or two pilots out of them were paid. But yeah, I think in this market, when there's so much competition, when you can build product very quickly, maybe one can argue that it's better to have that. At least if not profitable, it's better to have paid pilots and paying customers.
Yeah, it completely makes sense. And what do you think, like achieving a good distribution and a product position, how important that is, like while building the startup?
Yeah, I mean, you cannot build a company without building a good product and good distribution, right?
Right,
The whole idea of building a business is, do I have something, that there's a market for? And if yes, how do I reach that market? How do I reach out to those customers in the first place? So, yeah, I mean, that is, without that, you don't have a business, basically.
right. So, but like achieving a good distribution, like people actually struggle with that, right? Like if you see reaching out to customers, a process, it's people tend to struggle what things to do, what things not to do, okay, and also identifying which is working for us, which is not working for us. Okay, it takes lot of trial and error, efforts, and also money, right? That actually plays a very important role, the runway and everything, right? So suppose a company who has a limited resources and time, okay, so how they can go early into market, test the product, okay, and achieve a good distribution in the current area? What do you think?
Yeah, see, if you have limited runway, you need to back calculate everything from that side, that angle, right? Like how many months of runway do you have, and what is a realistic sort of goal to reach in terms of your business, and then from that perspective, how do you fundraise as well?
Right.
So yeah, right. Like for example, if I only have 6 months of runway, I need to make sure that I am able to validate my problem and have, let's say 5 6 paid pilots in the next 4 months, so that for the last 2 months I leave some time to do the fundraise and for money to hit the bank. So some sort of rough calculation like that, I think, would help and would go a long way for you. So but again, the specifics really depends on what is the industry that you're in, what is your personal runway, how big is your sales cycle, and all of that.
Got it, got it. Yeah, Aditi. So that's all I wanted to discuss currently on this podcast. Thank you so much for taking time and coming on board and doing this for us. Okay. So Aditi is also helping a lot of early stage founders in setting up their GTM process, also in terms of fundraising. So I'll also add the details of Aditi's profile with this episode. You can surely reach out to her. And to be honest, Aditi has worked with Junix in the past months. And to be honest, based on my experience, she has been very helpful, and she can like give good sort of in terms insights in terms of how to do the GTM, how to do the fundraising. Yeah, Aditi, that's it from my side. Thank you so much for taking time and doing this for us.
Thank you so much, Prabhakar, and thank you for the lovely words. It was a pleasure to have this conversation. Bye
Yeah,
bye.
bye bye. Thank you. Bye.